Before we begin, I need to tell you about a text message that still haunts investigators. A text message sent at 10:09 p.m. on a Friday night that seemed casual, almost playful. But within 20 minutes of sending that text, a 23-year-old healthcare worker would be dead. And the most disturbing part? This murder was completely preventable. The system had the killer in custody just months before. They knew he was dangerous, and they let him go anyway. If you're new to Crime Case Voices, this channel exposes the failures in our justice system and fights for victims who deserve better. Like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications because this case will make your blood boil. And if you're as angry as I am about what happened to Kada, leave a comment below. Now let's begin. October 4th, 2024. A Friday night in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Kada was working her shift at an assisted living facility in the Germantown section of the city. At 23 years old, Kada was exactly where she wanted to be in life. She'd found her calling as a healthcare worker, caring for elderly residents who needed her. Her co-workers described her as dedicated, compassionate, someone who genuinely loved her job. She had dreams, plans, a whole future ahead of her. Kada was beautiful, not just physically, though she was that too, with a smile that could light up a room and eyes that sparkled with life. But she was beautiful in the way she treated people, in the care she gave to her patients, in the love she showed her family. She was the kind of person who made the world better just by being in it. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. She mattered. Remember that as we go through this story. Kada mattered. That Friday night seemed like any other shift. Kada checked on residents, helped with medications, made her rounds. The overnight shift at an assisted living facility can be quiet, peaceful. Most residents are sleeping. The staff keeps watch, responds to needs, ensures everyone is safe and comfortable. It's important work. Work that Kada took seriously. But sometime during her shift, Kada decided to leave early. The exact reason isn't clear. Maybe she wasn't feeling well. Maybe there was a personal matter she needed to attend to. Maybe she just needed a break. Whatever the reason, shortly before 10 p.m., Kada told her supervisor she was leaving. She gathered her things, said goodbye to her co-workers, and walked out into the night. She had no idea she would never walk back in. She had no idea she had less than 30 minutes left to live. At 10:09 p.m., Kada sent a text message. And this text message is the key to understanding what happened next. The text went to a man named King, a 21-year-old from Philadelphia who Kada apparently knew. The exact nature of their relationship is unclear. Were they dating? Were they friends? Had they just met? Investigators haven't released all those details. But what we do know is what that text message said. 3 words that would seal Kada's fate. 3 words that, in hindsight, sound like a cry for help that no one understood. 3 words that investigators would later discover and feel sick about. Kidnap me again. Read that again. Kidnap me again. What does that even mean? Was it a joke? An inside reference to something that had happened before? A role-play scenario? A coded message? Or was it literal? Had King actually kidnapped Kada before? And if so, why would she willingly meet up with him again? Why would she text him? Why would she leave work to see him? These questions haunt everyone who's followed this case. Because the answer matters. It matters in understanding Kada's state of mind. It matters in understanding the relationship between her and her killer. It matters in understanding whether this was planned or spontaneous, whether Kada had any idea of the danger she was walking into. What we know for certain is this. At 10:09 p.m., Kada sent that text to King. Surveillance cameras at the assisted living facility captured what happened next. The footage shows Kada arriving in the parking lot. And then it shows a car, a stolen Hyundai Accent, backing into a parking spot near where Kada was. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. Kada had texted Kian. Minutes later, a car arrives. Kada approaches the car. And then, at 10:24 p.m., just 15 minutes after sending that text, Kada's cell phone stops transmitting a signal. Her phone went dead. Just like that, One moment it was pinging off cell towers, sending and receiving data, doing all the normal things a smartphone does. And then nothing. Silence. Darkness. Gone. According to investigators, Kada was killed approximately 20 minutes after she left work. 20 minutes. That's how long she had left when she walked out of that assisted living facility. That's how long she had left when she sent that text. 20 minutes between leaving a job where she was safe, surrounded by coworkers, helping people, and being dead in a shallow grave. But here's what makes this case so infuriating, so enraging, so absolutely unforgivable. Kian King should never have been free that night. He should have been in jail. Because just 6 months earlier, in April 2024, Kian King had been arrested for kidnapping another woman. A different victim who had the courage to come forward, who pressed charges, who tried to make sure King couldn't hurt anyone else. The prosecutor asked for nearly $1 million bail. $1 million, because they knew he was dangerous, because they knew he was a flight risk, because they knew that if he was released, he would hurt someone. And the magistrate, the person whose job it is to protect the public, set bail at just $200,000. And Kian King immediately posted the necessary $20,000. And just like that, he walked out of jail, free to roam the streets, free to contact victims, free to kidnap and murder Kada Scott. If that bail had been set higher, Kada would still be alive today. If the system had done its job, if the magistrate had listened to the prosecutors, if public safety had been prioritized over a defendant's convenience, Kada Scott would be working her shifts at the assisted living facility, caring for patients, living her life. But instead, she's dead. And Kian King got exactly what he wanted. Another chance to hurt someone. Another opportunity to kidnap. Another victim. Think about that text message again. Kidnap me again. Did Kada know she was in danger? Was she being coerced? Was there a history between them that we don't know about? Drop your theories in the comments below, because this mystery is darker than anyone wants to admit. Before Kada Scott became a headline, before her name was attached to a murder case, before the world knew her story, she was just Kada. A young woman with dreams and hopes and plans for her future. And if we're going to tell this story right, if we're going to honor her memory, we need to understand who she was. Not just the victim in a crime story, but the person, the daughter, the friend, the healthcare worker who cared deeply about the people she served. Kada Scott was 23 years old when she died. 23. That's so young. That's barely out of college age. That's the age when you're still figuring out who you are, what you want from life, where you're heading. Most 23-year-olds are just starting their careers, just beginning to spread their wings, just learning to be fully independent adults. Kada should have had decades ahead of her. She should have had time to fall in love, get married, have children, build a career, travel the world, experience all the joys and sorrows and adventures that make up a human life. Instead, she got 23 years. That's it. That's all she got. But in those 23 years, Kada made an impact. She chose a profession that's all about caring for others. Healthcare work, especially in assisted living facilities, is not glamorous. It's not high-paying. It's often thankless. You're changing bedpans, helping people bathe, administering medications, dealing with confused or combative patients, working long hours for modest wages. People don't go into that field for the money or the prestige. They go into it because they care, because they have compassion, because they want to make a difference in people's lives, even if that difference is just making someone's final years a little more comfortable, a little more dignified. That was Kada. Her co-workers at the assisted living facility talked about how dedicated she was, how she'd go the extra mile for residents, how she'd sit and talk with the lonely ones, hold hands with the scared ones, advocate for the ones who couldn't advocate for themselves. She didn't just see her job as a paycheck. She saw it as a calling. She genuinely cared about the elderly people under her care. Her family described her as loving, vibrant, full of life. She had a personality that drew people in. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly make it brighter. The kind of person who remembered your birthday, who checked in on you when you were having a hard time, who celebrated your victories like they were her own. She was loved, deeply, completely loved by the people who knew her. And she was so young. I keep coming back to that because it matters. 23 years old means she was born in 2001. She grew up with social media, with smartphones, with all the technology that's supposed to keep us connected and safe. She came of age in a world that's supposed to be more aware of dangers to women, more cognizant of red flags, more protective. And yet, none of that saved her. None of that prevented what happened on October 4th, 2024. Kada's family has been devastated by her death. Imagine being her mother, getting that phone call, or her father having to identify her body, or her siblings trying to process that their sister is gone, murdered, thrown into a shallow grave like she was nothing, like her life didn't matter, like all those years of memories and love and shared experiences could just be erased by one person's violence. The Philadelphia community where Kada lived and worked was shocked by her murder. This wasn't some anonymous person. This was someone they knew, someone they'd seen at work, someone who was part of the fabric of their neighborhood. Her death sent ripples through everyone who'd ever interacted with her. The residents at the assisted living facility who'd come to depend on her care, the coworkers who'd shared shifts with her, the friends who'd made plans with her that would now never happen. But here's what we need to talk about: that text message. Kidnap me again, because that text suggests a history. It suggests that something had happened before between Kada and King. Something involving kidnapping, or at least the concept of it. And we need to understand what that was about, because it might explain why Kada left work that night to meet him. Why she walked willingly into a situation that ended with her death. There are a few possibilities, and none of them are good. Possibility 1. It was a joke. Maybe kidnap me was their way of saying, come pick me up, or let's hang out. Maybe it was playful banter that meant nothing sinister. But if that's the case, it's a tragic coincidence that she ended up actually dead. Possibility 2. King had actually kidnapped or abducted Kada before, and she was referencing that incident. But if that's true, why would she willingly meet up with him again? Was she being coerced? Threatened? Was there something he had over her? Possibility 3. They had some kind of relationship that involved roleplay or scenarios that Kada thought were consensual but that King was using as cover for actual violence. We don't know which of these is true. The investigation hasn't released all the details about Kada and King's relationship, but what we do know is that whatever that text meant, whatever Kada thought was going to happen when she met King that night, she was wrong. She thought she was safe. She thought she knew what she was walking into. She thought she could control the situation. And she was tragically, fatally wrong. This is the part of the story that's hardest to tell. Because we want victims to be perfect. We want them to have made all the right choices, to have seen all the red flags, to have protected themselves. It's easier to process tragedy when we can tell ourselves, well, I would never do that, or I would have known better. But the truth is, victims aren't perfect. They're human. They make mistakes in judgment. They trust people they shouldn't. They miss warning signs. They convince themselves that danger isn't really danger. And none of it, means they deserve what happens to them. Kada Scott did not deserve to die. Whatever her relationship with King was, whatever that text meant, whatever reason she had for leaving work early to meet him, none of it justifies what he did to her. She was a 23-year-old woman trying to live her life. She was not responsible for her own murder. King is responsible. The system that released him on low bail is responsible. But Kada? She's just a victim. A young woman whose life was stolen from her by someone who should have been behind bars. Her family has set up memorials in her honor. They've spoken publicly about their grief, their anger, their desperate wish that they could turn back time and warn Kada not to send that text, not to leave work, not to meet King. But time doesn't work that way. We can't go back. We can only move forward and try to make sure that Kada's death means something. That it leads to changes in how bail is set, how dangerous offenders are handled, how we protect potential victims from people who've already shown they're capable of violence. Kada Scott was more than a victim. She was a person. A full, complex, flawed, beautiful human being who deserved so much more than 23 years. Remember her that way, not just as the girl who sent the wrong text, but as the healthcare worker who cared for the elderly. What would you want people to remember about you if your life was cut short? How would you want your story told? Think about that as we continue. As the daughter who was loved, as the friend who made people smile, as someone who mattered. October 4th, 2024. Let's reconstruct that night minute by minute, because understanding the timeline is crucial to understanding how this tragedy unfolded. How a normal Friday night shift turned into a murder. How 20 minutes changed everything. The shift started normally enough. Kada arrived at the assisted living facility in Germantown for her overnight shift. These shifts typically run from late evening through early morning, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. or similar hours. It's the quiet time in assisted living facilities. Most residents are sleeping. The staff is there for emergencies, for residents who need help during the night, for medications that need to be administered, for the general safety and well-being of everyone in the facility. Kada had worked these shifts before. She knew the routine. Check on residents, make rounds, help anyone who needs assistance, keep detailed notes, watch for any changes in condition that might require medical attention. It's important work, and it requires staff who are attentive and caring. Kada was both of those things, but something was different that night. Maybe Kada wasn't feeling well. Maybe she'd received a message or call that upset her. Maybe there was a personal issue that needed her attention. Whatever the reason, at some point during her shift before 10 p.m., Kada decided she needed to leave early. She approached her supervisor and explained that she had to go. The exact conversation hasn't been made public, but the supervisor apparently gave permission. Maybe they thought it was a family emergency. Maybe Kada seemed distressed and they wanted to help. Maybe the facility was adequately staffed and they could manage without her for the rest of the shift. Kada gathered her belongings. She said goodbye to the coworkers who were on duty with her. Did they notice anything unusual about her demeanor? Did she seem scared, nervous, excited? Or did she just seem like someone who needed to leave work early for personal reasons? We don't know. But we do know that none of her coworkers had any reason to think that when Kada walked out that door, she was walking to her death. 10:09 p.m. Kada sends the text to King. Kidnap me again. 3 words that would become the most analyzed piece of evidence in the case. 3 words that investigators would pore over, trying to understand meaning, context, history. 3 words that Kada's family would have to hear repeated in news reports, in court proceedings, in endless speculation online. 3 words that would define how the public viewed this case. But in that moment, at 10:09 p.m., those were just words on a screen. A message sent from one phone to another. Kada pressed send and probably didn't think twice about it. She probably grabbed her jacket, her purse, her keys. She probably walked through the familiar hallways of the assisted living facility, maybe waving goodbye to a resident who was still awake, maybe stopping briefly at the nurse's station to sign out. She walked out into the Philadelphia night, into the parking lot, into the last moments of her life. The surveillance cameras tell the next part of the story. And this is where it gets chilling, because the cameras show Kada in the parking lot. They show her arriving at her car or at the designated meeting spot. And they show another vehicle arriving, a Hyundai Accent. Later investigation would reveal this car was stolen. It didn't belong to King. He'd taken it from someone else, probably specifically for this purpose. A stolen car can't be traced back to you as easily. A stolen car gives you plausible deniability. A stolen car is what you use when you're planning to commit a crime. The Hyundai Accent backs into a parking spot. This detail matters. Backing in means you can pull out quickly. It means you've thought ahead about making a fast exit. It's what criminals do when they're planning something. Kada approaches the car. The surveillance footage isn't clear enough to show exact details of what happens next. But we know Kada gets near or into the vehicle. And we know that sometime in the next few minutes, her life ends. 10:24 p.m. 15 minutes after sending that text. 15 minutes after arranging to meet King. 15 minutes after walking out of the safety of her workplace. Kada Scott's cell phone stops transmitting a signal. For anyone who doesn't understand what this means technically, your phone is constantly communicating with cell towers, sending and receiving data, pinging locations, staying connected to the network. When a phone suddenly stops doing all of that, it means one of two things. Either the phone has been turned off deliberately, or it's been destroyed. Given what we know happened to Kada, we can guess which one it was. Investigators believe Kada was killed approximately 20 minutes after leaving work. 20 minutes. From alive and breathing and working her job to dead and gone. The cause of death was later determined to be a gunshot wound to the head. Quick. Final. No chance to fight back, no chance to escape, no chance to call for help. One moment Kada Scott existed in the world. The next moment she didn't. But Kian King wasn't done. Killing Kada was just the first part. Now he had a body to dispose of. Now he had evidence to hide. Now he had to make sure he wouldn't get caught. And this is where we see just how calculated, how cold, how absolutely devoid of humanity this person is. Because what he did next shows planning, shows consciousness of guilt, shows that he knew exactly what he was doing and was trying to get away with it. Kian King drove Kada's body to a wooded area. The exact location would later be identified as near an abandoned middle school in Philadelphia. This wasn't a random dump site. This was a place he either knew about or had scouted out. A place secluded enough that a body might not be found for days, weeks, or even longer. A place where he could dig a shallow grave and hide the evidence of his crime. And that's what he did. He dug a grave. How long did that take? An hour? 2 hours? How much effort did he put into making sure Kada was hidden? And during all of that time, the digging, the burying, the covering up, did he think about what he'd done? Did he feel remorse? Did he see Kada's face and remember that she was a person, a human being with family and friends and dreams? Or was she just a problem to be solved, evidence to be disposed of, an obstacle to his freedom? After burying Kada, Kian King wasn't finished covering his tracks. He still had the stolen Hyundai Accent, the car that had been captured on surveillance cameras at the assisted living facility, the car that could link him to the crime scene. So he burned it, set it on fire and destroyed it, eliminating any forensic evidence that might have been inside. Blood, DNA, fingerprints, all of it gone up in flames. And then Kian King went home. He went back to his regular life. He acted like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just murdered someone, like Kada Scott wasn't lying in a shallow grave while her family waited for her to come home. He went to sleep that night, or tried to. He woke up the next morning and continued his life while Kada's had ended. But here's the thing about murder. It's almost impossible to get away with. There are always traces, always evidence, always someone who saw something or knows something. And in this case, the evidence was everywhere. The surveillance footage, the text messages, the stolen car, the burn site, the grave. Kian King had left a trail, and investigators were about to follow it straight to him. But first, Kada's family had to realize she was missing. And that's where our story goes next, to the desperate search for a young woman who was already gone. If you were Kada's coworker and she'd left early that night, would you have been worried when she didn't show up for her next shift? At what point does concern turn into alarm? Share your thoughts below. When did Kada Scott's family realize something was wrong? That's the question that haunts the beginning of this investigation. Because in those first hours, those first days, no one knew Kada was dead. They thought she was missing. They thought maybe she'd gotten into an accident, or had a medical emergency, or was staying with a friend and had lost track of time. They held on to hope because the alternative, the truth, was too terrible to imagine. Saturday, October 5th, 2024. The day after Kada left work early and never came home. Her family expected to hear from her. When they didn't, they started making calls, texting her phone, calling friends, checking social media, doing all the things you do when someone doesn't check in and you're starting to worry. But Kada's phone was dead. The calls went straight to voicemail. The text showed as undelivered. She wasn't posting on social media. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. By Saturday evening, the worry had escalated to panic. This wasn't like Kada. She stayed in touch. She let people know where she was. Even if she decided to take a spontaneous trip or spend time with friends, she would have told someone. She wouldn't just disappear without a word. Her family knew something was terribly wrong. Sunday, October 6th. Kada's family filed a missing person report with the Philadelphia Police Department. This is the official starting point of the investigation, though in reality, police had probably already started looking into her disappearance once the family reached out. Missing person cases involving young women are taken seriously, especially when the circumstances are suspicious. Last seen leaving work, phone goes dead, no contact with family, completely out of character. The police began their investigation the way they always do. They interviewed Kada's family and friends. They went to the assisted living facility and talked to her coworkers, watched the surveillance footage, documented the timeline. They pulled her phone records to see who she'd been communicating with in the days and hours before she disappeared. And that's when they found it. The text message to King. "Kidnap me again," sent at 10:09 p.m. on October 4th, minutes before her phone went dead. Investigators immediately zeroed in on King. Who was this person? What was his relationship to Kada? And most importantly, where was he on the night of October 4th? What they discovered made him an instant person of interest, because King had a very recent, very relevant criminal history. He'd been arrested in April 2024, just 6 months before Kada disappeared, for kidnapping another woman. Let that sink in. The man Kada texted "Kidnap me again" had literally been charged with kidnapping someone else earlier that same year. This wasn't a joke or playful banter. This was a pattern. This was someone who had actually kidnapped a woman before. And now another woman associated with him had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The police brought King in for questioning. I wish I could tell you exactly what happened in that interview, what he said, how he acted, whether he seemed nervous or cocky or scared. But those details haven't been fully released. What we do know is that King initially denied knowing anything about Kada's whereabouts. He probably claimed he didn't see her that night, or that yes, she texted him but they never ended up meeting, or that he had no idea what happened to her. Classic deflection. Classic lies. But the police had evidence. They had the surveillance footage from the assisted living facility showing the stolen Hyundai accent. They had the text messages. They had the phone records showing Kada's phone going dead shortly after she left work. They had enough to know that King was lying. They just didn't have enough to charge him yet. They didn't have a body. They didn't have direct evidence of murder. They had suspicion and circumstantial evidence. But they needed more. So they kept digging. They looked into the stolen Hyundai accent. They found evidence that King had access to it. They discovered that the car had been burned, destroyed in a fire that looked intentional, designed to eliminate evidence. They talked to King's friends and associates, trying to find anyone who might have seen him on October 4th, anyone who might know what happened to Kada. And meanwhile, Kada's family was in agony. Every day that passed without finding her was another day of torture. They organized search parties. They posted flyers all over Philadelphia. They pleaded on social media for anyone with information to come forward. They contacted local news stations trying to get coverage, trying to keep Kada's face in the public eye, because they still held out hope. Maybe she was being held somewhere. Maybe she was injured and couldn't get help. Maybe she was alive and just needed to be found. But deep down, they knew. You don't just disappear like this and turn up fine. You don't have your phone go dead and all contact cease and then come back with a happy explanation. They knew something terrible had happened to their daughter, their sister, their loved one. They just didn't want to admit it yet. Admitting it would make it real. October 14th, 2024. 10 days after Kada disappeared. This is when the case took a dramatic turn. Because on this day, King turned himself in. Not for Kada's disappearance, not yet. He turned himself in on charges related to the April kidnapping case. Remember that case? The one where prosecutors asked for nearly $1 million bail and the magistrate set it at just $200,000. The one where King posted $20,000 and walked free? Well, apparently there were ongoing legal issues with that case, and King decided to surrender himself rather than wait to be arrested. This move, turning himself in, was probably strategic. It made him look cooperative, like someone who respects the legal process. It gave him a chance to control the narrative. And it meant he was now in custody, which could actually work in his favor if police were getting close to charging him with Kada's disappearance. Being already in jail on other charges can sometimes make you seem less like an immediate flight risk. Before we continue, If you are following this case, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. But here's what Kian King didn't know. The police were about to find Kada's body, and when they did, everything would change. October 16th, 2024, Wednesday, 12 days after Kada disappeared, police received an anonymous tip. This tip would prove to be the breakthrough investigators desperately needed. The anonymous caller told police to search an abandoned middle school property in Philadelphia. And specifically, they said something chilling. Go back. She's there. Look again. That phrasing, go back and look again, suggests that police might have already searched that area once and missed something, or that the caller knew police were close but hadn't looked hard enough. Either way, investigators took the tip seriously. They assembled a search team and headed to the abandoned middle school. What they found there was heartbreaking. Kada's belongings, her identification card with her name on it, her iPhone case, personal items that confirmed she had been there, that this wasn't just a random tip from a crank caller. This was real. This was where Kada had been taken. And if her belongings were there, her body probably was too. The search intensified. The abandoned middle school property included a heavily wooded area. Overgrown, dense with brush and trees, the kind of place where something could be hidden and not found for months or even years. The search team spread out, looking for any sign of disturbed earth, any indication that someone had been digging. And then they found it. The grave. It wasn't deep. Kian King hadn't spent hours digging an elaborate burial site. It was a shallow grave, hastily dug, barely concealed. The kind of grave that says, I need to hide this body quickly and get out of here. Inside that grave was Kada Scott. 12 days after she'd left work early. 12 days after she'd sent that text. 12 days after her phone had gone dead. 12 days of her family hoping against hope that she'd be found alive. But she wasn't alive. She was dead. Murdered. Her body discarded like trash in a shallow grave near an abandoned school. This was how Kada Scott's story ended. Not graduating from college, not getting married, not having children, not growing old. But dead at 23, buried in the woods. Another victim of male violence. The police processed the crime scene. They documented everything. They carefully excavated Kada's remains. They collected evidence from the grave and the surrounding area. And they prepared to bring murder charges against the man they knew was responsible. Kian King. Who was the anonymous tipster who told police where to find Kada? Was it someone who knew Kian King? Someone who'd helped him bury the body but had a guilty conscience? Someone who'd seen something and finally decided to speak up? We still don't know. That person's identity has been protected. But whoever they are, they gave Kada's family the one thing they needed most. The ability to bring their daughter home. To lay her to rest properly. To stop wondering and start grieving. The medical examiner determined the cause of death. Gunshot wound to the head. Kada had been shot and killed, probably very shortly after getting near or into that stolen Hyundai Accent in the assisted living facility parking lot. She probably never even knew what hit her. One moment she was alive, waiting to meet Kian King for whatever reason she texted him. The next moment she was gone. Would you come forward if you knew where a body was hidden, even if it meant implicating yourself in some way? The anonymous tipster made that choice. What would you do? Now we need to go back. Back to April 2024. 6 months before Kada Scott was murdered. Because there was another woman. Another victim. And her story is the reason why Kada's death was completely, utterly, tragically preventable. April 2024. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A woman whose identity has been protected for her safety was kidnapped by Kian King. The exact details of how this kidnapping occurred, where it happened, how long she was held, and how she escaped have not been fully released to the public. But what we do know is that it was serious enough that when she reported it to police, when she pressed charges, the prosecutor's office took it very seriously. Kidnapping is not a minor crime. In Pennsylvania, kidnapping is a first-degree felony, one of the most serious charges you can face short of murder. It carries a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. When someone is charged with kidnapping, it means they unlawfully removed or restrained another person with the intent to hold them against their will. It means they took away someone's freedom, someone's autonomy, someone's basic human right to go where they want to go. And that's exactly what King did to this first victim. He kidnapped her. The prosecutors believed her. They believed her enough to file formal charges. They believed her enough to ask for extremely high bail. They believed her enough that they went to court and argued that King was a danger to the community, a flight risk, someone who absolutely should not be released while awaiting trial. The prosecutors asked for nearly $1 million bail. Let me repeat that, $1 million. That's not a number prosecutors throw around lightly. That's the kind of bail you ask for when you believe someone is extremely dangerous. When you believe that if they're released, they will hurt someone else. When you believe that protecting the public is more important than the defendant's presumption of innocence or right to freedom while awaiting trial. The magistrate, the judge who makes these bail decisions, had a choice to make. Listen to the prosecutors who'd investigated the case and believed King was a serious threat. Or set a lower bail, giving King a chance at freedom. The magistrate chose the latter. Instead of $1 million, the bail was set at $200,000. Now, in Pennsylvania's bail system, you don't have to pay the full amount to get out. You pay 10% to a bail bondsman and they post the rest. That means to get out on $200,000 bail, King only needed $20,000. And he had it, or someone in his life had it. Within hours of the bail being set, King posted the $20,000 and walked out of jail, free, awaiting trial but living his life, going wherever he wanted, doing whatever he wanted, including, as it would turn out, murdering Kada. But the system's failure goes even deeper than just the bail decision. Because what happened next shows just how broken our justice system can be when it comes to protecting victims. The first victim, the woman King kidnapped in April, was supposed to appear in court. There was going to be a hearing, possibly a trial. She was the key witness. Without her testimony, the prosecution's case would fall apart. And she didn't show up. We don't know why. Maybe she was too scared. Maybe King or someone associated with him had threatened her. Maybe she'd moved away and couldn't afford to come back for court. Maybe she just wanted to move on with her life and forget the trauma of being kidnapped. Maybe the system had already failed her so badly, releasing her kidnapper on bail after prosecutors said he was dangerous, that she'd lost faith in the process. Whatever the reason, when the first victim didn't appear in court, the charges were withdrawn, dropped, gone. Just like that, King was no longer facing kidnapping charges. He was free and clear. The system had given him a second chance. And he used that second chance to murder Kada. Think about the first victim right now. Think about what she must be feeling, knowing that the man who kidnapped her went on to kill someone else. Think about the guilt she might be carrying, wondering if Kada would still be alive if she'd just shown up to court. But here's the truth. This is not her fault. She was a victim. She had already been through trauma. The system failed to protect her. The system failed to protect Kada. The system failed both of these women. The responsibility for Kada's death lies with King, the man who pulled the trigger. But the complicity lies with a bail system that releases dangerous offenders back onto the streets, with prosecutors who don't fight hard enough to keep victims engaged in the process, with a society that makes it so difficult and traumatic for victims to participate in their own cases that they choose to walk away rather than face their attackers again in court. This pattern plays out over and over again in our justice system. A dangerous person gets arrested. Bail is set too low. They get out. They commit another crime, often worse than the first. And then everyone acts surprised, like this couldn't have been predicted, like there were no warning signs. But there were warning signs. King had literally kidnapped someone. He'd shown that he was capable of abducting a woman, of restraining her against her will, of taking away her freedom. And the system said, sure, you can go free while awaiting trial, and then acted shocked when he escalated to murder. The prosecutors in Kada's case have been careful not to explicitly blame the magistrate who set King's bail. They've focused on building their murder case, on getting justice for Kada. But behind the scenes, you know they're furious. They're thinking about that day in April when they stood in court and said, this man is dangerous. He needs to be held on high bail. And they were ignored. And now a young woman is dead. Kada Scott's family has every right to be angry at the system. They should be angry. Their daughter died because someone who'd already shown he was a kidnapper was allowed to walk free. Their daughter died because a magistrate made a bad call. Their daughter died because the first victim couldn't or wouldn't testify. Their daughter died because our justice system is fundamentally broken when it comes to protecting women from violent men. And here's the most infuriating part. This will happen again. Right now, somewhere in America, there's a judge setting bail too low for a dangerous offender. There's a victim who won't show up to court because the system has traumatized her too much. There's a prosecutor fighting to keep someone locked up and losing that fight. And soon, there will be another Kada Scott. Another young woman who dies because the system failed her. Unless we change things. Unless we demand accountability. Unless we say that victims like Kada and the first kidnapping victim matter more than a defendant's convenience. Unless we insist that bail decisions take dangerousness seriously, that victim safety is prioritized, that women are protected from men with histories of violence. But right now, in October 2024, those changes haven't happened yet. And Kada Scott is dead. And Kian King, who should have been in jail, who should never have been free to send and receive text messages and meet up with victims in parking lots, he's finally being held accountable. But it's too late. Kada is still gone. And no amount of justice for King will bring her back. The first victim is out there somewhere, trying to live her life, carrying the weight of what happened. If you're watching this, if you're hearing about it, please understand. She is not to blame. The system is to blame. Kian King is to blame. But not her. She was a victim who tried to do the right thing by reporting her kidnapping. And the system failed her. Let's not compound that failure by blaming her for what King did next. Statistics show that when defendants charged with violent crimes are released on bail, a significant percentage go on to commit additional crimes. When prosecutors ask for high bail and judges set it lower, they're gambling with public safety. And sometimes, like in Kada's case, people lose that gamble with their lives. This isn't just about Kada Scott. This is about every potential victim who's at risk because our bail system prioritizes defendants' rights over community safety. The bail reform debate is complex. On one side, advocates argue that poor defendants shouldn't be held in jail just because they can't afford bail. They point out that pretrial detention can cost people their jobs, their housing, their families. They argue that people are innocent until proven guilty and shouldn't be punished before conviction. These are valid points. On the other side, prosecutors and victim advocates argue that dangerous offenders need to be kept off the streets to protect the public. They point to cases exactly like this one, where someone out on bail commits a worse crime. They argue that public safety has to be the priority, especially when dealing with violent offenders. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. We need a bail system that's fair to low-level, non-violent offenders who pose little risk. But we also need a system that takes dangerousness seriously, that listens when prosecutors present evidence that someone is a threat, that prioritizes potential victims' safety over defendants' convenience. Kian King should never have been able to post bail. The prosecutors knew it. The first victim knew it. And now Kada Scott has paid the ultimate price for a magistrate's bad decision. How do we fix a system that releases dangerous people on bail and then acts surprised when they commit more crimes? How do we balance defendants' rights with public safety? How do we protect future Kada Scotts? These are the questions we need to be asking. Drop your thoughts below. $200,000 bail? Kian King only needed $20,000. And he had it. Or someone in his life had it. Within hours of the bail being set, King posted the $20,000 and walked out of jail. Free. Awaiting trial but living his life. Going wherever he wanted. Doing whatever he wanted. Including, as it would turn out, murdering Kada Scott. But the system's failure goes even deeper than just the bail decision. Because what happened next shows just how broken our justice system can be when it comes to protecting victims. The first victim, the woman Kian King kidnapped in April, was supposed to appear in court. There was going to be a hearing, possibly a trial. She was the key witness. Without her testimony, the prosecution's case would fall apart. And she didn't show up. We don't know why. Maybe she was too scared. Maybe King or someone associated with him had threatened her. Maybe she'd moved away and couldn't afford to come back for court. Maybe she just wanted to move on with her life and forget the trauma of being kidnapped. Maybe the system had already failed her so badly, releasing her kidnapper on bail after prosecutors said he was dangerous that she'd lost faith in the process. Whatever the reason, when the first victim didn't appear in court, the charges were withdrawn. Dropped. Gone. Just like that. King was no longer facing kidnapping charges. He was free and clear. The system had given him a second chance. And he used that second chance to murder Kada. Think about the first victim right now. Think about what she must be feeling, knowing that the man who kidnapped her went on to kill someone else. Think about the guilt she might be carrying, wondering if Kada would still be alive if she'd just shown up to court. But here's the truth. This is not her fault. She was a victim. She had already been through trauma. The system failed to protect her. The system failed to protect Kada. The system failed both of these women. The responsibility for Kada's death lies with King, the man who pulled the trigger. But the complicity lies with a bail system that releases dangerous offenders back onto the streets, with prosecutors who don't fight hard enough to keep victims engaged in the process, with a society that makes it so difficult and traumatic for victims to participate in their own cases that they choose to walk away rather than face their attackers again in court. This pattern plays out over and over again in our justice system. A dangerous person gets arrested. Bail is set too low. They get out. They commit another crime, often worse than the first. And then everyone acts surprised, like this couldn't have been predicted, like there were no warning signs. But there were warning signs. King had literally kidnapped someone. He'd shown that he was capable of abducting a woman, of restraining her against her will, of taking away her freedom. And the system said, sure, you can go free while awaiting trial, and then acted shocked when he escalated to murder. The prosecutors in Kada's case have been careful not to explicitly blame the magistrate who set King's bail. They've focused on building their murder case, on getting justice for Kada. But behind the scenes, you know they're furious. They're thinking about that day in April when they stood in court and said, this man is dangerous. He needs to be held on high bail. And they were ignored. And now a young woman is dead. Kada Scott's family has every right to be angry at the system. They should be angry. Their daughter died because someone who'd already shown he was a kidnapper was allowed to walk free. Their daughter died because a magistrate made a bad call. Their daughter died because the first victim couldn't or wouldn't testify. Their daughter died because our justice system is fundamentally broken when it comes to protecting women from violent men. And here's the most infuriating part. This will happen again. Right now, somewhere in America, there's a judge setting bail too low for a dangerous offender. There's a victim who won't show up to court because the system has traumatized her too much. There's a prosecutor fighting to keep someone locked up and losing that fight. And soon, there will be another Kada Scott. Another young woman who dies because the system failed her. Unless we change things. Unless we demand accountability. Unless we say that victims like Kada and the first kidnapping victim matter more than a defendant's convenience. Unless we insist that bail decisions take dangerousness seriously, that victim safety is prioritized, that women are protected from men with histories of violence. But right now, in October 2024, those changes haven't happened yet. And Kada Scott is dead. And King, who should have been in jail, who should never have been free to send and receive text messages and meet up with victims in parking lots, he's finally being held accountable. But it's too late. Kada is still gone. And no amount of justice for King will bring her back. The first victim is out there somewhere, trying to live her life, carrying the weight of what happened. If you're reading about this case, if you're hearing about it, please understand, she is not to blame. The system is to blame. King is to blame, but not her. She was a victim who tried to do the right thing by reporting her kidnapping. And the system failed her. Let's not compound that failure by blaming her for what King did next. How do we fix a system that releases dangerous people on bail and then acts surprised when they commit more crimes? This is the question that needs to be asked. Drop your thoughts below. October 19th, 2024. Saturday. 15 days after Kada Scott was murdered. The day her body was found in that shallow grave near the abandoned middle school. The Philadelphia Police Department immediately shifted from a missing person investigation to a homicide investigation. And every piece of evidence they'd been collecting over the past 2 weeks suddenly became critical to building a murder case against King. But here's the thing about murder investigations. Finding a body is just the beginning. You need evidence that proves who killed the victim. You need to establish means, motive, and opportunity. You need forensics, witnesses, documentation. You need to build a case so strong that a jury will convict beyond a reasonable doubt. And in this case, investigators had a lot of work to do. Let's start with the forensic evidence from Kada's body. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. This tells investigators several important things. First, it confirms this was a homicide, not an accident or natural causes. Second, it suggests the killing was quick and decisive. A gunshot to the head is typically fatal immediately or very quickly. Third, it means there's a murder weapon out there somewhere, a gun that was used to kill Kada Scott. Finding that gun becomes crucial. If investigators can locate the weapon and tie it to King through ballistics, registration records, witness testimony, or forensic evidence, that's a huge piece of the puzzle. But guns used in murders are often disposed of, thrown into rivers, buried, taken apart, and scattered. King had 15 days between the murder and the discovery of Kada's body to get rid of that gun. Did he still have it? Had he ditched it? Would investigators ever find it? The shallow grave itself told a story. The location, near an abandoned middle school in a wooded area, suggested King knew the area or had scouted it out beforehand. You don't just randomly pick a place to bury a body. You choose somewhere you think is secluded, somewhere people don't usually go, somewhere a body might not be discovered for a long time. The fact that Kada's belongings were found there first, before her body, suggests King might have dumped some items separately, or that animals or weather had disturbed the grave site. The grave was shallow, which indicated King either didn't have much time, didn't have good tools, or didn't care enough to dig deeper. A shallow grave is easier to dig, but also easier to discover. It shows a level of panic or carelessness. If King had really wanted to hide Kada's body effectively, he would have buried her much deeper, or chosen a location farther from the city, or used some other method of disposal. The shallow grave suggests he wanted her hidden enough that she wouldn't be immediately found, but he wasn't concerned about long-term concealment. Now let's talk about the surveillance footage from the assisted living facility. This was some of the most critical evidence in the case. The cameras captured Kada leaving work and entering the parking lot. They captured a stolen Hyundai Accent backing into a parking space. They captured the time frame, showing that everything happened within a 15-minute window. This footage establishes that Kada met someone in that parking lot, that the meeting occurred shortly after she texted King, and that she disappeared immediately afterward. Investigators worked to enhance the surveillance footage. Could they see who was driving the Hyundai Accent? Could they see what happened when Kada approached the vehicle? Could they capture any identifying details? The quality of parking lot security cameras varies widely. Some are high definition and capture clear images. Others are grainy and barely useful. In this case, the footage was good enough to show the vehicle and establish the timeline, but whether it showed King's face clearly is unclear. The stolen Hyundai Accent was a major piece of evidence. Investigators had to prove that King had access to this vehicle, that he was the one driving it that night, and that it was used in Kada's murder. They traced the car's history. When was it reported stolen? Where was it stolen from? Who was the owner? And most importantly, what happened to the car after October 4th? The answer to that last question was damning. King burned the car, intentionally set it on fire to destroy evidence. This is classic consciousness of guilt behavior. Innocent people don't steal cars and then burn them. This action alone suggests King knew the car could link him to a crime and needed to eliminate that evidence. But burning a car doesn't always destroy all evidence. Modern forensics can sometimes recover traces even from burned vehicles. Did investigators find any of Kada's DNA in the car before it was burned? Any fingerprints? Any blood evidence? These are the kinds of forensic details that can make or break a murder case. Then there's the digital evidence. Kada's phone records showed she texted King at 10:09 p.m., The phone records also showed that her phone stopped transmitting at 10:24 p.m., just 15 minutes later. This creates a clear timeline and establishes that whatever happened to Kada happened very quickly after she contacted King. But investigators wanted more than just that one text. They wanted to see the full conversation history between Kada and King. Had they been texting regularly? Were there previous references to kidnapping or anything else that would explain that strange message? Were there threats? Was there evidence of coercion? The content of their text message history could provide crucial context for understanding their relationship and what happened that night. They also looked at King's phone records. Who did he text or call before and after Kada's murder? Did he reach out to anyone for help disposing of the body? Did he Google things like, how to hide a body? Or, how long before a missing person is declared dead? Criminals often make mistakes with their phones, searching for incriminating information or contacting accomplices in ways that leave digital trails. And speaking of accomplices, investigators believe King might not have acted alone. The anonymous tip that led police to Kada's body suggests someone else knew where she was buried. Was that person involved in the murder? Did they help dig the grave? Were they in the car when Kada was killed? Or did they only learn about it afterward and eventually couldn't live with the secret? If there were accomplices, finding them and getting them to testify against King would be crucial. Accomplices can provide insider details about what happened, can corroborate evidence, can fill in gaps that physical evidence can't. But accomplices are also difficult witnesses. They're criminals themselves who might lie to minimize their own involvement. The prosecutors also had to establish motive. Why did King kill Kada Scott? Was it premeditated? Did he plan to kill her when he arranged to meet her? Or was it spontaneous? Did something go wrong during their meeting that escalated to murder? Did Kada threaten to report him for something? Did she reject him in some way? Or was this a predatory killing, with King targeting Kada simply because he could? The "kidnap me again" text complicates the motive question. It suggests Kada willingly met with King, possibly expecting some kind of consensual encounter. But it also references kidnapping, which by definition is non-consensual. What was the nature of their relationship? This question would need to be answered to help a jury understand why this murder happened. Finally, investigators had to rule out alternative suspects. Defense attorneys in murder cases often try to point the finger at other possible perpetrators. Could anyone else have killed Kada? Was there anyone else in her life who had motive and opportunity? Thoroughly investigating and eliminating other suspects strengthens the case against King by showing that all investigative roads led to him. By October 23, 2024, 19 days after the murder, prosecutors felt they had enough evidence to charge King. The charges were extensive: murder, robbery, theft, tampering with evidence, abuse of corpse, and related offenses. Each charge carried significant prison time. Together, they painted a picture of a man who had kidnapped, murdered, robbed, and desecrated Kada Scott, then tried to cover up his crimes. Murder is the big one, obviously. That's life in prison. But the additional charges are important too. Tampering with evidence, burning the car, hiding the body shows consciousness of guilt. Abuse of corpse shows depravity, showing he treated Kada's body as trash after killing her. Robbery suggests he took her belongings, maybe her phone, her purse, her valuables. Each charge adds to the narrative of who King is and what he did. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the case and want to support justice for victims like Kada Scott, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every subscriber helps this channel grow and allows us to continue telling stories that matter. Share this video with anyone who's following the case or who cares about holding violent offenders accountable. And leave a comment below with your thoughts on the evidence. Now let's talk about King's arrest and what happened next. The formal charges were filed on October 23, 2024. King was already in custody on the previous kidnapping charges, so he didn't need to be arrested again. He simply had new charges added to his case. When he was informed of the murder charges, how did he react? Did he maintain his innocence? Did he ask for a lawyer? Did he try to explain away the evidence? These details haven't been fully released, but we know he was appointed a public defender and began preparing his defense. Bail was not an option this time. When you're charged with first-degree murder, especially when you've already shown you're a danger to the community, judges don't set bail. King would remain in custody until trial. No more walking free. No more opportunities to hurt anyone. Finally, the system was doing what it should have done in April, keeping a dangerous person locked up. The Philadelphia District Attorney's Office issued a statement saying they were committed to getting justice for Kada. They acknowledged that this case had been difficult for her family and for the community. They promised a thorough prosecution, and they sent a message to other potential offenders. If you hurt someone in Philadelphia, we will find you, we will charge you, and we will hold you accountable. But behind that confident statement was probably a lot of frustration, because everyone involved in the case knew the truth. Kada would be alive if the bail system had worked correctly in April. This murder was preventable, and now they had to build a case, go through a trial, and try to get some measure of justice for a death that never should have happened. What piece of evidence do you think will be most important at trial? The text message? The surveillance footage? The burned car? The body location? Let me know your thoughts. Now we need to talk about the man at the center of this tragedy. Who is Kian King? Where did he come from? What made him capable of kidnapping one woman and murdering another? Because understanding the perpetrator is part of understanding the crime. Kian King was 21 years old when he murdered Kada. 21. That's young. That's barely an adult. Most 21-year-olds are still figuring out life, maybe finishing college, starting first real jobs, learning to be independent. But Kian King, at 21, had already kidnapped one woman and murdered another. What goes wrong in a person's life that they end up there by such a young age? King is from Philadelphia. He grew up in the city, attended local schools, was part of the community. He wasn't some outsider who came to Philadelphia to commit crimes. He was homegrown. Someone's neighbor, someone's classmate, someone's friend, maybe. On the surface, he probably seemed like a regular young man. People who knew him casually probably never suspected he was capable of violence. But there must have been signs. There always are. Maybe he had a history of violence toward women that didn't result in charges. Maybe he'd been controlling or aggressive in past relationships. Maybe there were incidents of threatening behavior that were brushed off as boys being boys, or he has a temper but he's not really dangerous. Maybe people saw red flags and ignored them, or didn't know how to intervene. The April 2024 kidnapping charges were definitely a sign. That wasn't a minor incident. That was a serious crime that showed King was willing and able to abduct a woman and restrain her against her will. But instead of taking that as the massive warning it was, the system set low bail and let him out. And 6 months later, he escalated from kidnapping to murder. This escalation is significant. Kidnapping and murder are related but distinct crimes. Kidnapping is about control, about taking someone's freedom, about having power over them. Murder is about ending a life, about the ultimate act of violence. Not every kidnapper becomes a murderer, but someone who's already shown they're willing to abduct someone has crossed a line that makes further violence more likely. Criminal psychologists talk about the progression of violence. Offenders often start with smaller crimes and escalate over time. Maybe King had a history of assault or domestic violence before the April kidnapping. Maybe the kidnapping wasn't his first serious crime, just his first one that resulted in charges. And when he got away with it, when the charges were dropped and he walked free, it probably reinforced his belief that he could do whatever he wanted without real consequences. Until Kada. Until he went too far. Until he took a life and left enough evidence that investigators could build a murder case against him. What about King's family? Did they know about his violent tendencies? Were they enablers who made excuses for him? Or were they horrified to learn what their son/brother/cousin was capable of? Family members of violent criminals often struggle with conflicting emotions. Love for their family member combined with horror at what they've done. Some families stand by the perpetrator no matter what. Others cut ties completely. We don't know how King's family has responded to his arrest and charges. What we do know is that someone posted his bail in April. Someone had $20,000 to get him out of jail after the kidnapping charges. Was that family? Friends? Was it someone who believed he was innocent? Or someone who knew he was guilty but wanted him free anyway? Whoever posted that bail bears some moral responsibility for what happened to Kada, even if they have no legal culpability. King's criminal defense attorney will try to paint him in a sympathetic light at trial. That's their job. They'll probably argue he had a difficult childhood or faced systemic racism or struggled with mental health issues or was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They'll try to humanize him, to make the jury see him as more than just a monster. And that's fine, that's how our justice system works. Everyone deserves a defense. But the facts are the facts. King kidnapped a woman in April 2024. He was released on bail. In October 2024, he murdered Kada Scott. He shot her in the head, buried her in a shallow grave, burned the car he used to transport her body, and tried to get away with it. Those are the facts. Whatever his background, whatever his struggles, whatever sympathetic narrative his defense tries to construct, those facts don't change. One question that keeps coming up in true crime communities is, was Kada the first person King murdered? Or were there other victims before her? The first kidnapping victim survived. Thank God. But were there others who didn't? Were there other women who disappeared in Philadelphia in the months or years before Kada's murder who might have encountered King? Investigators have probably looked into this. When you catch someone for murder, you review unsolved cases to see if there are any connections. You look at missing person reports. You check for similar MOs, methods of operation. If King had killed before, there might be patterns that would link him to other crimes. So far, no connections to other murders have been publicly announced. But the investigation is ongoing. There's also the question of accomplices. Investigators believe others may have been involved in Kada's murder or the cover-up. If that's true, who are these people? Are they King's friends? Family members? Criminal associates? And what exactly was their involvement? Did they help King bury her and then couldn't live with the guilt? Or were they just someone who knew something and finally decided to do the right thing? Law enforcement will have wrestled with this question. If the tipster was involved in the crime, they might be offered immunity or a plea deal in exchange for testifying against King. What drives someone like King to commit such violence? This is the question that everyone asks about murderers. What's broken in their brain, their psychology, their moral compass? Is it nature or nurture? Were they born with violent tendencies, or did their environment create them? The truth is probably some combination of both. Maybe King had neurological issues that affected impulse control or empathy. Maybe he grew up in an environment where violence was normalized. Maybe he experienced trauma that warped his development. Maybe he had antisocial personality disorder or some other diagnosable condition. Or maybe he was just evil, a person who chose violence because he enjoyed it, because he felt entitled to control and hurt women, because he fundamentally didn't care about other people. At his trial, mental health experts might evaluate King. The defense might try to argue diminished capacity or some other psychological defense. But ultimately, the jury will have to decide. Was King responsible for his actions? Did he know what he was doing was wrong? And does he deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison for what he did to Kada Scott? The prosecution's answer to all those questions will be a resounding yes. King was a functional adult who held a job, drove a car, used technology, planned and executed a murder, and tried to cover it up. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew it was wrong. And he did it anyway. That's not mental illness. That's not diminished capacity. That's criminal intent. That's murder. And that deserves the maximum punishment the law allows. Think about the people in King's life who might have seen warning signs but didn't act on them. Have you ever known someone who gave off bad vibes, but you didn't report it because you weren't sure? This is a real dilemma. Comment below. Between October 2024 and whenever the trial is scheduled to begin, both sides, the prosecution and the defense, will be working frantically to build their cases. Criminal trials, especially murder trials, require months of preparation. Let's look at what each side is doing right now. The prosecution's case strategy is probably straightforward. present the overwhelming evidence that King murdered Kada Scott. They'll start with timeline and opportunity. They'll show that Kada texted King minutes before her phone went dead. They'll present the surveillance footage showing the stolen Hyundai Accent in the parking lot where Kada was last seen. They'll establish that King had access to that vehicle. They'll prove the car was later burned, suggesting consciousness of guilt. Then they'll present the physical evidence. Kada's body, found in a shallow grave. The cause of death, gunshot wound to the head. The location near an abandoned middle school where King either knew about or had access to. Her belongings found at the scene. The anonymous tip that led police there. All of this creates a narrative. King lured Kada to that parking lot, killed her, transported her body in the stolen car, buried her, burned the car, and thought he'd gotten away with it. The prosecution will also present the text message evidence. That "kidnap me again" text is both helpful and problematic. It's helpful because it establishes communication between Kada and King right before her death. Creates the timeline. It shows King was expecting to meet her. But it's problematic because it suggests Kada went willingly, which could complicate the narrative. The defense will definitely try to use that text to their advantage. To counter that, the prosecution needs to establish the context of Kada and King's relationship. They'll interview everyone who knew both of them. They'll look through social media, text message histories, any documentation of their interactions. They need to answer the question, what did "kidnap me again" mean? Was it a reference to King's April kidnapping charges? Was it an inside joke? Was it evidence of coercion? The answer to this question could significantly impact how the jury views the case. The prosecution will call the first kidnapping victim as a witness if she's willing to testify. Her testimony would be incredibly powerful. She can describe what King did to her in April. She can establish a pattern of behavior. She can show the jury that King has a history of abducting women. The defense will object to this testimony, arguing it's prejudicial and not directly relevant to Kada's murder. But the judge might allow it under rules that permit evidence of prior bad acts to show modus operandi or pattern of behavior. Forensic experts will testify about the autopsy, the crime scene, the evidence collection. They'll explain how investigators determined Kada was shot in the head, how long she'd been dead when found, what condition her body was in. This testimony will be graphic and disturbing. Kada's family will have to sit through it, but it's necessary to prove how she died. Digital forensics experts will testify about the phone records, the text messages, the cell tower data. They'll create maps showing where Kada's phone was when it stopped transmitting, where King's phone was, whether the locations match up with the crime scene timeline. If investigators found the murder weapon, ballistics experts will testify about whether the bullet that killed Kada came from that specific gun. If they haven't found the weapon, they'll still testify about what kind of gun was used based on the bullet recovered and the wound characteristics. The defense's strategy will be to create reasonable doubt. They don't have to prove King is innocent. They just have to make the jury uncertain enough that they can't convict beyond a reasonable doubt. So what arguments will the defense make? First, they'll attack the strength of the evidence. Is the surveillance footage clear enough to definitively identify King? Are there gaps in the timeline that could allow for alternative explanations? Is the cell phone data really as conclusive as the prosecution claims? Second, they'll try to provide alternative theories. Maybe someone else killed Kada. Maybe she was involved with dangerous people or dangerous activities that the prosecution isn't revealing. Maybe the real killer is still out there and the police just want to close the case by blaming King. Third, they'll use the "kidnap me again" text to suggest Kada and King had some kind of relationship that makes the murder charge questionable. Maybe it was consensual activity that went wrong. Maybe Kada was a willing participant in whatever happened until something unexpected occurred. This is a disgusting defense strategy, essentially blaming the victim, but it's one defense attorneys sometimes use. Fourth, they'll challenge every piece of forensic evidence. They'll bring their own experts who will testify that the prosecution's forensics are flawed or inconclusive. They'll argue that crime scene investigations were contaminated or improperly conducted. They'll try to exclude evidence on technical grounds. Fifth, They might argue that King had mental health issues that affected his capacity to form criminal intent. This is tricky because King clearly had enough mental capacity to plan and execute a murder and cover it up. But the defense might argue he was in some kind of crisis, or that he didn't fully understand the consequences of his actions. The judge in this case will make crucial decisions about what evidence is admissible. Can the prosecution introduce King's prior kidnapping charges? Can they discuss his bail situation and argue that he should never have been free to kill Kada? Can they bring in character witnesses who will testify about King's violent tendencies? Each of these decisions could significantly impact the trial's outcome. Jury selection will be challenging. Finding jurors who haven't heard about this case will be difficult given the media coverage. Finding jurors who don't already have strong opinions about bail reform, about violence against women, about the criminal justice system, that's even harder. Both sides will try to select jurors they think will be sympathetic to their case. The prosecution will want jurors who are pro-law enforcement, who believe in holding criminals accountable, who will be emotionally moved by Kada's story. The defense will want jurors who are skeptical of police, who demand extremely high standards of proof, who might be sympathetic to a young black man accused of a crime in a system they see as biased. Pre-trial motions will address dozens of issues. The defense will file motions to suppress evidence, to exclude testimony, to dismiss charges, to change venue. Most of these motions will probably be denied, but some might be granted, which could weaken the prosecution's case. There's also the possibility of a plea deal, though it seems unlikely in a case this serious. The prosecution might offer to take the death penalty off the table, if they were considering seeking it, in exchange for a guilty plea and life in prison. This would spare Kada's family the trauma of a trial and guarantee King never walks free. But it would also mean no public trial, no full accounting of what happened, no opportunity for the family to see King convicted by a jury. Most prosecutors in cases like this don't offer generous plea deals. They want the conviction, the public trial, the full punishment. They want the defendant to face a jury and be held fully accountable. So unless the case has some major weakness that hasn't been revealed, this is probably going to trial. Kada's family will be preparing themselves emotionally for the trial. They'll have victim advocates helping them, explaining the process, preparing them for what they'll see and hear. They'll be deciding whether to give victim impact statements, whether to attend every day of the trial or just key moments, how to handle media attention. The trial itself could last weeks. Opening statements, witness testimony, cross-examinations, forensic evidence presentation, expert witnesses, closing arguments, jury instructions, deliberation. Every minute will be excruciating for Kada's family, but it's the only path to justice. And somewhere in all of this, Kada Scott's memory needs to be preserved. She's not just evidence in a criminal trial. She's not just a victim. She was a person. She had dreams and fears and relationships and a whole internal life that ended too soon. The trial needs to honor that, even as it mechanically goes through the legal process of convicting her killer. If you were on the jury in this case, what reasonable doubts, if any, would you have based on what you know so far? Be honest in the comments. If you're following this case because you believe in justice for victims, I want to ask you to do something important right now. Hit that like button to help this video reach more people. Subscribe to Crime Case Voices and turn on all notifications so you never miss updates on this case or others like it. Share this video with anyone who's been following Kada Scott's story or who cares about holding violent offenders accountable. And leave a comment below telling me what you think the verdict will be. Your engagement directly supports this channel and allows us to continue investigating and covering cases that matter. Now let's continue. As we wait for King's trial to begin, it's worth stepping back and asking a bigger question. Will Kada Scott get justice? And what does justice even mean in a case like this? If King is convicted and sentenced to life in prison, is that justice? He'll still be alive. He'll still get to breathe, eat, sleep, think, experience existence. Kada doesn't get any of that. She's gone forever. She'll never have another birthday, never fall in love again, never achieve her dreams, never grow old. How is King spending life in prison equivalent to Kada losing her entire life? Some would argue that true justice would be the death penalty. An eye for an eye. King took Kada's life, so the state should take his. Pennsylvania does have the death penalty, though it's rarely used. Governor Josh Shapiro has imposed a moratorium on executions during his time in office. So even if King were sentenced to death, that sentence might never be carried out. He might die of old age in prison before the state executes him. Others argue that life in prison is actually a worse punishment than death. Decades of confinement, loss of freedom, living in a cage, knowing you'll never get out. That could be seen as a harsher penalty than a quick execution. King is 21 now. If he's sentenced to life without parole, he could spend 50, 60, even 70 years in prison. That's a long time to think about what you've done. But here's the truth. No punishment will truly be justice for Kada Scott. Nothing the justice system does to Kian King will bring her back. Nothing will undo the trauma her family has experienced. Nothing will erase the last moments of terror Kada felt before King shot her. Justice in the sense of making things right, of restoring what was lost. That's impossible in a murder case. What we can get is accountability. We can make sure King is held responsible for what he did. We can make sure he's punished according to the law. We can make sure he never has the opportunity to hurt another woman. That's not perfect justice, but it's the best our imperfect system can offer. But there's another level of justice that needs to happen here. Systemic justice. The justice of fixing the broken bail system that allowed King to walk free after kidnapping someone. The justice of protecting future victims by learning from the failures that led to Kada's death. Several advocacy groups have already started using Kada's case as an example of why bail reform needs to be more nuanced. They're arguing that while we shouldn't keep low-risk, nonviolent offenders locked up just because they're poor, we absolutely should keep high-risk violent offenders locked up regardless of whether they can afford bail. Dangerousness, not wealth, should be the determining factor. Some states have already moved to this model. They use risk assessment tools to evaluate defendants, looking at their criminal history, the nature of the current charges, ties to the community, likelihood of fleeing, and danger to public safety. Based on this assessment, some defendants are released on their own recognizance, some get bail, and some are held without bail. It's not a perfect system, but it's better than a purely financial bail system that lets dangerous people out if they have $20,000. Pennsylvania needs to adopt similar reforms. Kada's family should be meeting with legislators, pushing for laws that would prevent another situation like this. They should be advocating for victims' rights, for better protections, for a system that takes prosecutors' recommendations seriously when they say someone is too dangerous to be released. The media has a role to play too. Cases like Kada's need to be covered not just as isolated incidents, but as symptoms of a systemic problem. Every time someone out on bail commits another crime, it should be reported with full context. What were they charged with originally? What bail was requested? What was granted? Did prosecutors object to the bail amount? Transparency creates accountability, and the public needs to care. We need to vote for judges and legislators who prioritize public safety. We need to support organizations that advocate for victims. We need to show up at town halls and demand answers when the system fails. Because it will keep failing unless we make it a priority to fix it. Kada's case is also highlighting the issue of violence against women more broadly. Women, especially young women, are disproportionately victims of violent crime committed by men they know or have had relationships with. Kada knew Kian King well enough to text him, to meet him. The first kidnapping victim also apparently knew him. This pattern of men targeting women they have some connection to is incredibly common. We need better education about recognizing red flags in relationships, about understanding that charming can be manipulative, that jealousy isn't love, that controlling behavior escalates to violence. We need to teach young women to trust their instincts, to leave at the first sign of danger, to prioritize their safety over hurting someone's feelings. But we also need to stop putting all the responsibility on potential victims. It's not women's job to avoid being murdered. It's men's job not to murder. We need to teach boys and young men about respect, consent, emotional regulation, healthy relationships. We need to intervene when we see problematic behavior, not brush it off as boys will be boys. And we need systems that protect women when they do report abuse or violence. The first kidnapping victim did everything right. She reported King, she pressed charges, she tried to use the system. And the system failed her by releasing him on low bail and then dropping charges when she couldn't face testifying. That's unacceptable. We need better victim support, better witness protection, better ways of prosecuting cases even when victims are too traumatized to testify. As King's trial approaches, as the legal system grinds through its process, Kada Scott's family is living with their loss every single day. They wake up and she's still gone. They go to bed and she's still gone. Holidays, birthdays, ordinary Tuesdays. Every day is a reminder of what they lost. They've had to plan a funeral instead of celebrating her 24th birthday. They've had to choose a casket instead of helping her move into a new apartment. They've had to make victim impact statements instead of watching her graduate or get married or have children. Every milestone that should have been joyful is now marked by absence. This is the reality of murder. It's not just one life lost. It's countless futures stolen. It's families torn apart. It's communities traumatized. It's ripple effects that spread outward forever. Kada's co-workers at the assisted living facility are dealing with the loss. The residents she cared for lost someone who made their lives better. Her friends lost someone they loved. Everyone she touched is affected. And for what? Why did King decide to kill Kada Scott? What was going through his mind when he pulled that trigger? What did he think would happen? Did he believe he'd get away with it? Or did he not care either way? We may never fully understand his motivation. And honestly, it doesn't matter. No motivation would justify what he did. No explanation would make it okay. What matters is that Kada is gone and King is facing justice. What matters is that her family finally has some answers, even though those answers don't bring her back. What matters is that King will spend decades, possibly the rest of his life, in prison for what he did. That's not perfect justice, but it's something. The trial will be difficult for Kada's family to sit through. They'll hear details they probably don't want to know. They'll see photos and evidence that will haunt them. They'll watch King sit there, alive and breathing, while their daughter lies in a grave. It will test their strength, their faith, their ability to keep going. But they'll do it. They'll be there every day, watching justice unfold, making sure Kada's voice is heard even though she can't speak for herself anymore. They'll give their victim impact statements when the time comes. They'll tell the jury who Kada was, what she meant to them, what her losses cost. They'll make sure the jury sees her as a person, not just a victim in a case file. And when the verdict comes in, and it will almost certainly be guilty given the evidence, they'll have some measure of closure. It won't erase the pain. It won't bring Kada back. But it will mean that her killer was held accountable. That justice, imperfect as it is, was served. Kada Scott's story is tragic, but it's also a call to action. It's a reminder that our systems are broken and we need to fix them, that victims matter and need protection, that violence against women is an epidemic we need to address, that bail reform needs to balance fairness with safety, that one bad decision by one magistrate can cost someone their life. If Kada's death leads to changes that save even one other person, then her death will have meant something beyond just tragedy. If her story inspires people to demand better from our justice system, to support victims, to speak out against violence, then she'll have made an impact even in death. But the best tribute to Kada Scott isn't systemic change or policy reform or advocacy, important as those things are. The best tribute is simply remembering her. Remembering that she was a real person with dreams and hopes and a future. Remembering that she mattered. Remembering her name. What changes do you think need to happen to prevent tragedies like this? What can we do as a society to protect women from violence? Share your ideas in the comments. We've spent the last hour talking about evidence, about suspects, about the justice system's failures, about legal processes and trial strategy. But I want to end where we should have started, with Kada Scott herself. Not Kada the victim. Not Kada the healthcare worker who was murdered. Just Kada, the person. Because at the end of the day, that's what's been lost here. Person. A complete, complex, beautiful human being who had thoughts and feelings and experiences and dreams. Someone who laughed and cried and loved and feared and hoped. Someone who mattered not because of how she died, but because of how she lived. Kada Scott was 23 years old. She'd lived through the awkwardness of middle school, the drama of high school, the independence of young adulthood. She'd had first crushes and heartbreaks. She'd stayed up too late talking with friends, slept in on weekends, binge-watched shows, scrolled social media, done all the normal things people her age do. She'd celebrated birthdays and holidays with her family. She'd worked jobs, earned money, made plans for her future. She chose healthcare as her profession. That choice tells us something about who she was. Healthcare workers, especially those who work with the elderly, are special people. They have to be patient, compassionate, willing to do difficult and sometimes unpleasant work for modest pay. They have to genuinely care about others, have to see the humanity in every person they serve, have to show up every day ready to make someone else's life a little bit better. That was Kada, someone who showed up, someone who cared, someone who made a difference in the lives of the elderly residents under her care. Those residents trusted her, relied on her, looked forward to seeing her smile. When she died, they lost someone important. The world lost someone who made it better. Kada had family who loved her deeply, parents who raised her, who worried about her, who were proud of her, siblings who grew up with her, who shared memories and inside jokes and family traditions, extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, who watched her grow from a baby to a child to a teenager to a young woman. All of them are grieving now. All of them have a Kada-shaped hole in their lives that will never be filled. She had friends who've lost someone irreplaceable. Friends from childhood who remember playing with her. Friends from school who remember studying with her and going to parties and making plans for the future. Friends from work who remember the kindness she showed to residents and the camaraderie she built with co-workers. Friends who thought they'd grow old together, who thought Kada would be at their weddings, would be godmother to their children, would be there for all the milestones of life. Instead, they're mourning someone who should still be here. Kada had dreams. We don't know all of them. Maybe she wanted to advance in her healthcare career, become a nurse or a doctor or a healthcare administrator. Maybe she wanted to travel, see the world beyond Philadelphia. Maybe she wanted to fall in love, get married, have children of her own. Maybe she had creative dreams, art or music or writing. Maybe she had simple dreams, a nice apartment, a reliable car, financial stability. It doesn't matter what specifically she dreamed of. What matters is that she had a future full of possibilities, and all of that was stolen from her. I keep coming back to her age. 23. She'd barely started her adult life. Most people at 23 are still figuring things out, still learning who they are and what they want. They're making mistakes and growing from them. They're building the foundation of the life they'll live for decades to come. Kada didn't get decades. She got 23 years, and then King decided that was enough. If you've made it this far in this video, thank you for caring about Kada's story. Thank you for taking the time to learn about her, to understand what happened, to demand justice. If this case has moved you, I want to ask you to do something meaningful right now. Subscribe to Crime Case Voices and turn on all notifications so we can continue telling stories like Kada's. Stories that matter, stories that deserve to be heard. Hit that like button to help this video reach more people who need to know Kada's name. Share this everywhere on your social media, in your group chats, with your family and friends. The more people who know what happened to Kada Scott, the more pressure there is on the system to change, the more likely it is that her death will lead to something meaningful. Leave a comment below telling me what you'll remember most about Kada's story, or sharing any cases you'd like me to cover next. And if you're able, consider donating to organizations that support families of murder victims, or that advocate for bail reform, or that work to prevent violence against women. Turn your anger and sadness about this case into action that creates change. That's how we honor Kada. That's how we make her matter. The trial of King will happen. He'll almost certainly be convicted. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. That's the legal resolution to this case. But the personal resolution, the healing, the coming to terms with loss, the rebuilding of lives shattered by violence, that will take much longer. Kada's family will be working through their grief for years, probably forever. There's no timeline on healing from something like this. Philadelphia has been deeply affected by Kada's murder. It's reminded the community that violence can strike anywhere, can target anyone. It sparked conversations about safety, about the bail system, about how we protect the most vulnerable among us. Some good might come from those conversations. Some changes might be made. But everyone wishes those changes could have come before Kada died. Not because of her death. The assisted living facility where Kada worked has also been impacted. They've had to process the loss of a colleague, had to explain to confused elderly residents why Kada isn't coming back, had to continue operating while dealing with their own trauma and grief. They've probably implemented new safety protocols, had conversations with staff about awareness and danger signs, tried to ensure that what happened to Kada doesn't happen to anyone else. Kada's social media profiles are still up. Friends and family have left messages on them. "I miss you. I can't believe you're gone. Rest in peace, beautiful." Her photos are still there, frozen in time, showing a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Looking at those photos, knowing what happened, is heartbreaking. Because in those pictures, she had no idea. She was just living her life, taking selfies, making memories, being 23 years old. There's been some discussion in true crime communities about the "Kidnap Me Again" text and what it means about Kada's judgment or decision-making. And I want to be very clear about this. It doesn't matter. Even if Kada made a mistake in meeting King that night, even if she misjudged the danger she was in, even if she trusted someone she shouldn't have, none of that makes her responsible for her own murder. The only person responsible for Kada Scott's death is King. He's the one who pulled the trigger. He's the one who chose violence. He's the one who deserves 100% of the blame. We need to stop victim blaming in cases like this. We need to stop dissecting victims' choices and looking for ways they could have prevented their own murders. Because that approach does nothing except make future victims less likely to come forward, less likely to report violence, less likely to seek help. Creates a culture where we scrutinize victims more than perpetrators. And that's wrong. Kada Scott deserved to live. She deserved to feel safe. She deserved to trust that someone who'd been arrested for kidnapping would still be in jail. She deserved a justice system that protected her instead of failing her. She deserved to celebrate her 24th birthday, her 30th birthday, her 50th birthday. She deserved to find love and build a family and grow old and live a full life. And King took all of that from her. As we close out this case, I want you to do something. Close your eyes for a moment and think about Kada Scott. Not as a crime victim, not as a name in a news story, but as a person. A real, living, breathing person who had value and worth and meaning. Someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone's coworker, someone who mattered. And then think about all the other Kada Scotts out there. The young women who are in danger right now from men who should be in jail but aren't. The victims who've reported violence but aren't being protected. The people who are one bad decision, one unlucky encounter, one system failure away from becoming another tragic headline. What can we do for them? How do we prevent the next Kada Scott? How do we demand better from our justice system? How do we create a society where women are safe, where violence is taken seriously, where bail decisions prioritize public safety, where victims are protected and supported? These aren't rhetorical questions. They require real answers and real action. Call your legislators and demand bail reform. Support organizations that help crime victims. Volunteer with groups that work to prevent violence against women. Donate money if you can. Raise awareness by sharing stories like Kada's. Vote for judges and prosecutors who prioritize public safety. Show up at community meetings. Speak out when you see injustice. Because Kada Scott is gone. We can't bring her back. But we can honor her memory by making sure her death leads to change. By making sure the next woman in danger gets the protection Kada didn't get. By making sure the system that failed her is fixed so it doesn't fail the next person. Kada Scott was 23 years old when she died. She was a healthcare worker who cared for the elderly. She had a family who loved her and friends who miss her. She had dreams and hopes and a future full of possibilities. And on October 4th, 2024, all of that was stolen from her by a man who should never have been free to hurt anyone. Say her name, Kada Scott. Remember her face. Honor her memory. Demand justice. Create change. That's how we ensure that Kada Scott's life and death mattered. Rest in peace, Kada. Your story has been told. Your name will be remembered, and your family will get the justice you deserve. This has been the story of Kada Scott. Thank you for watching Crime Case Voices. If you believe in justice for victims like Kada, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop fighting for what's right.